The hot summer sun beat down mercilessly as Delilah Zimmerman clutched the letter from her father, tears threatening to spill from her emerald eyes. The San Pedro, Texas ranch, her home for all 22 years of her life, was facing ruin unless she could convince the bank to extend their loan. As the dust from her boots settled on the wooden boardwalk outside the Frontier Bank, she had no idea that by nightfall her world would be violently upended. Delilah's honey-colored hair was neatly pinned beneath her modest bonnet as she made her way back to her father's wagon. The year was 1875, and San Pedro was growing rapidly alongside the cattle industry that dominated South Texas. Their modest ranch had prospered for years, until drought and disease had decimated half their herd the previous season. "Miss Zimmerman," called Mr. Hargrove, the shopkeeper, tipping his hat as she passed. "How's your father faring? Haven't seen him in town these past weeks." "He's mending, thank you," she replied with a tight smile. Her father's fall from his horse had left him bedridden, forcing Delilah to handle their affairs, a responsibility that weighed heavily on her slender shoulders. As she climbed into the wagon, a commotion at the saloon caught her attention. A group of rough-looking men were mounting their horses, their loud laughter carrying across the street. One man in particular, tall with a jagged scar across his cheek, fixed his gaze on her. Something about his stare sent a chill down her spine. Delilah quickly flicked the reins, urging the horses forward. The road back to the Zimmerman ranch stretched before her, and Delilah's thoughts drifted to their neighbor, Drake O'Malley. At 26, Drake had built a respectable reputation as one of the finest cattlemen in the county. His ranch bordered their own, and he'd been nothing but kind to her family, especially since her mother's passing 3 years prior. She blushed thinking about his piercing blue eyes and the way he'd offered to help with their cattle without hesitation. The sun was beginning to set when Delilah heard hoofbeats approaching from behind. Glancing over her shoulder, her heart raced as she recognized the men from town. They were gaining on her rapidly. "Whoa there, little lady," called the scarred man as they surrounded her wagon. "Name's Rance Holden. Me and my boys here are mighty interested in chatting with you about your daddy's cattle." Delilah's grip tightened on the reins. "I have nothing to discuss with you, sir. Please let me pass." Holden's smile never reached his cold eyes. "I'm afraid that's not how this is gonna work." He nodded to one of his men. "We know your daddy's laid up, and we know about them fine heads of cattle you're struggling to keep. We've got a proposition that can't be refused." "Whatever you're offering, we're not interested," Delilah said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "Ain't offering nothing," Holden replied, his smile vanishing. "We're taking what we want, and you're coming along to ensure your father cooperates when we swing by your ranch." Before Delilah could react, one of the men grabbed the reins from her hands while another pulled her roughly from the wagon. She fought with all her strength, screaming for help that wouldn't come on the isolated road. "Someone will come looking for me," she warned as they bound her wrists. "Counting on it," Holden laughed. "But by then, we'll be long gone with your cattle, and you with us." Delilah was hoisted onto Holden's horse, her heart pounding with terror as they abandoned her wagon and rode toward her family's ranch. The men were clearly Rustlers, thieves who stole cattle and sold them across the border or to unscrupulous buyers. Such men were the scourge of honest ranchers, and now she was their captive. As night fell, they arrived at the Zimmerman ranch. 2 of Holden's men subdued the ranch hands while Holden himself dragged Delilah to the house. Her father, Samuel Zimmerman, was struggling to stand when they burst through the door. "Daddy," Delilah cried. "What's the meaning of this?" Samuel demanded, his face pale with pain and anger. "Simple business, old man," Holden explained casually. "We're taking your cattle, all of them, And your lovely daughter will be ensuring you don't send the law after us. Once we've sold the herd and are safely across the border, we'll let her go. Maybe. You won't get away with this, Samuel growled, reaching for the rifle beside his chair. Holden was faster, striking the older man with the butt of his pistol. Samuel collapsed, blood trickling from his temple. "Daddy," Delilah screamed, struggling against her captor. "He'll live," Holden assured her coldly, "if you cooperate." Within an hour, the rustlers had rounded up the entire Zimmerman herd. Delilah was forced onto a horse, her hands still bound, as they drove the cattle away from the ranch and into the darkness. She cast one last glance at her home, praying her father would recover and find help. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded as they rode. "South," Holden replied simply. "Got a buyer for these cattle in Mexico. After that, who knows? Pretty girl like you might fetch a good price, too." Terror seized Delilah's heart at his implication. She had to escape, but surrounded by armed men and miles from home, her chances seemed desperately slim. As the night wore on, her only comfort was the knowledge that someone would surely notice her absence. The question was whether help would come in time. Miles away, Drake O'Malley rode toward San Pedro, unaware of the drama unfolding at the neighboring ranch. He'd promised Samuel he'd check on their cattle situation and had just returned from a successful drive to Kansas. The money in his saddlebags would be enough to help the Zimmermans with their loan, a gesture he hoped would finally give him the courage to express his long-harbored feelings for Delilah. The following morning, Drake arrived in San Pedro, only to find the town buzzing with disturbing news. Mrs. Garland, the innkeeper's wife, spotted him immediately. "Drake, have you heard about the Zimmermans?" His blood ran cold. "What about them?" Samuel was found badly beaten, their ranch hands tied up, and Delilah's missing along with their entire herd. "Sheriff thinks it was Holden's gang, those rustlers that have been plaguing ranches south of here." Drake didn't waste another moment. He spurred his horse toward the Zimmerman ranch, his heart pounding with dread and determination. Delilah was in danger, and nothing would stop him from finding her. At the ranch, he found Samuel being tended to by the doctor, the old man's face ashen but his eyes burning with rage and worry. "Drake," Samuel grasped his arm weakly. "They took her. They took my Delilah." "I'll find her," Drake promised, his voice steady despite the fury building inside him. "I'll bring her home, Samuel. You have my word." Within the hour, Drake had gathered supplies and ammunition. Sheriff Taylor provided what information he had on Holden's gang, known rustlers who operated along the Texas-Mexico border. "They're headed for Mexico, most likely," the sheriff explained. "Once they cross, there's little I can do officially." "I'm not asking for official," Drake replied grimly. "Just point me in their direction," the sheriff sighed. They were last seen heading southeast toward Corpus Christi, probably aiming to cross near the Nueces River. "Holden has connections there." "I'll need a tracking party," Drake began, but the sheriff shook his head. "Can't spare the men, not with 3 other ranches reporting rustling this month. It would take days to organize a proper posse." Drake set his jaw. "Then I'll go alone." "That's suicide, boy. Holden has at least 6 men with him." "And I have a promise to keep," Drake replied, checking his Winchester rifle. "I'm leaving within the hour. If anyone wants to join me, they know where I'm headed." As Drake prepared to depart, 2 of his own ranch hands insisted on coming along: Miguel Vasquez and Tom Cooper, loyal men who'd ridden with him for years. It wasn't the posse he'd hoped for, but it would have to do. Time was of the essence. Every hour increased the distance between them and Delilah. As they rode out, Drake's mind was consumed with images of Delilah in danger. He'd admired her from afar for too long, always finding reasons to delay expressing his feelings. Now, The thought that he might never get that chance filled him with cold dread. "We'll find her, boss," Miguel assured him, reading his expression. "And when we do, those rustlers will wish they'd never set foot in San Pedro," added Tom, patting the pistol at his hip. Drake nodded grimly. "We ride hard. No stopping except to rest the horses when absolutely necessary." The trail left by a large herd of cattle wasn't difficult to follow initially. Holden's gang was driving them hard, caring little for subtlety in their haste to reach the border. But as the first day of tracking turned into evening, a powerful thunderstorm swept across the plains, washing away much of the trail. Drake cursed the heavens as rain soaked through his duster. "We make camp here," he called over the howling wind. "No use riding blind in this weather." That night, huddled beneath a makeshift shelter, Drake stared into the darkness. Was Delilah warm? Was she safe? The questions tormented him, along with the knowledge that every moment delayed could mean the difference between life and death. Dawn brought clearing skies, but a more challenging task. The rain had obscured many signs of the rustlers' passage, forcing Drake to rely on his years of tracking experience. They found broken branches, occasional hoofprints in muddy patches, and once, caught in a thorny bush, a scrap of fabric that Drake recognized from Delilah's dress. "They're pushing southeast, all right," Tom observed as they found fresher tracks by midday. "And driving those cattle too hard," Miguel added, pointing to where a cow had clearly fallen and been abandoned. "They'll lose half the herd before they reach Mexico at this pace." "They don't care about the cattle," Drake replied grimly. "They're just trying to put distance between themselves and any pursuers." As they pressed on, the terrain changed from the rolling plains of central Texas to the drier brushland approaching the coast. The heat was oppressive, and water sources became scarcer. They rationed their supplies carefully, aware that Holden's gang would need to do the same, especially with a herd to water. 4 days into their pursuit, they came upon a small Mexican settlement where the sight of gringos was met with suspicious stares. Drake approached cautiously, his limited Spanish allowing him to ask about passing cattle. An elderly man nodded reluctantly. "Many cattle, bad men. They take water, food." He gestured to a young woman with a bruised face. "They take what they want." "Was there a woman with them?" Drake asked urgently. "American, blonde hair." The old man's eyes softened with understanding. La señorita not willing she fight." He made a slapping gesture. "The one with the scar, he hit her when she tried to escape." Drake's hands tightened into fists. "How long ago?" 2 days, maybe less. They were gaining ground. Holden's gang was slowed by the cattle and evidently stopping to terrorize settlements along their way. With renewed determination, Drake led his small party onward, now with confirmation that Delilah was alive and fighting. Meanwhile, Delilah had indeed attempted escape during their stop at the settlement. Holden's brutality afterward left her with a swollen lip and renewed caution, but not defeat. She observed her captors carefully, noting their routines and weaknesses. Holden kept her close, his intentions becoming clearer with each leering glance. "Once we cross into Mexico," he told her one evening, fingers tracing her jawline as she recoiled, "might be I'll keep you for myself instead of selling you off. Might be you'd prefer that too." "I'd prefer dying," she spat back, earning another backhanded slap. "That can be arranged too," he warned, "but it'd be a waste of such a pretty face." Delilah's only comfort was the growing discord among the gang. The difficult drive was causing tensions, with 2 men already arguing over their share of the profits. She carefully nurtured these divisions, whispering doubts when she could, suggesting that Holden planned to cheat them once they crossed the border. As they neared the Nueces River, Holden announced they would cross at dawn. Our buyers meeting us 10 miles south of the border. We'll be rich men by tomorrow night." That night, as the gang celebrated with whiskey around their campfire, Delilah lay bound in Holden's tent, listening to their drunken boasts. Her opportunity came when Holden himself staggered in, intoxicated and dangerous. "Time we got better acquainted," he slurred, fumbling with the rope around her wrists. Delilah's heart hammered with fear, but she forced herself to remain calm. As he leaned over her, she brought her knee up sharply, catching him in the most vulnerable spot. Holden doubled over with a howl of pain, and Delilah scrambled past him, seizing a knife from his belt before bolting from the tent. The commotion alerted the other men, but their drunkenness slowed their reactions. Delilah slashed at the ropes binding a group of horses, causing several to bolt in panic. In the chaos, she mounted one and galloped into the darkness, her only guide the North Star above. "Get her!" Holden's enraged voice carried on the night air. $100 to whoever brings her back alive." Delilah rode hard, the unfamiliar horse responding to her desperate urging. Behind her, she could hear hoofbeats as at least 2 riders gave chase. The moon offered scant illumination as she weaved through brush and shallow ravines, hoping to lose her pursuers. She had no idea where she was, only that she needed to keep the North Star to her right if she hoped to eventually reach San Pedro again. After what seemed like hours, the sounds of pursuit faded, but Delilah dared not slow down. Dawn was approaching when her exhausted horse stumbled, nearly throwing her. "Easy," she soothed, patting the animal's lathered neck. They both needed rest and water, but stopping felt too dangerous. As the first light of day painted the eastern sky, Delilah spotted a small stream cutting through a wooded area. She guided her horse to it, allowing the animal to drink while she scanned their surroundings. The relative safety was short-lived. As she cupped water to her parched lips, a twig snapped nearby. Delilah whirled, knife raised, only to find herself facing one of Holden's men, the youngest of the gang, barely older than herself. "Found you," he said, leveling a pistol at her. "Holden wants you back real bad." "He'll kill me when he's done with me," Delilah replied, keeping the knife steady despite her trembling hands. The young rustler's expression wavered. "Not my concern. Now drop that knife and come quiet like." "You don't have to do this," she pressed. "You're not like them. I've seen how they treat you." His aim faltered slightly. "Shut up and get moving. They'll leave you behind," she continued. "Holden doesn't share, especially not with the youngest who does all the work while they drink and gamble." Something in her words struck home. The young man lowered his gun slightly, uncertainty written across his features. That moment of hesitation was all Delilah needed. She flung the knife with surprising accuracy, catching him in the shoulder. As he cried out in pain, she vaulted onto her horse and fled once more. Her freedom was short-lived. By midday, 3 riders appeared on the horizon behind her. Her horse was spent, stumbling with exhaustion while their fresher mounts rapidly closed the distance. Delilah urged the animal onward, but knew with sinking heart that recapture was inevitable. As the rustlers drew within shouting distance, a shot rang out but not from behind her. One of her pursuers tumbled from his saddle as 2 more shots cracked across the prairie. The remaining rustlers wheeled their horses, returning fire toward an unseen attacker. "Delilah, get down." A familiar voice shouted, "Drake." It was Drake's voice. Relief flooded through her as she slid from her horse and scrambled for cover in a shallow depression. Gunfire continued to exchange as Drake, Miguel, and Tom engaged the rustlers from concealed positions. The battle was brief but intense. When silence finally fell, Delilah cautiously raised her head to see Drake approaching, rifle still ready. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries, lingering on her bruised face. "No," she managed, her voice breaking as the reality of rescue overwhelmed her. "Drake, how did you find me?" He holstered his weapon and helped her to her feet. "I'd track you to the ends of the earth if I had to, Delilah." The sincerity in his voice brought fresh tears to her eyes. Without thinking, she threw herself into his arms, clinging to him as weeks of fear and desperation poured out in racking sobs. Drake held her tightly, one hand stroking her tangled hair. "It's all right now," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." When she had composed herself, Drake explained how they'd been following the cattle trail for over a week, gaining ground steadily. "We caught sight of the herd yesterday, but then your escape threw everything into chaos." Holden split his men, some to continue with the cattle, others to hunt you down. "Holden," Delilah said with sudden urgency. "He wasn't among these men. He's still out there with the others, heading for Mexico with our cattle." Drake's expression hardened. "First priority is getting you to safety. Tom will escort you to the nearest settlement while Miguel and I continue after Holden." "No," Delilah protested firmly. "I'm not separating from you, and I'm not leaving until those rustlers pay for what they've done. They killed 2 of our ranch hands, beat my father, and stole everything we had left. I'm going with you." Drake started to argue, but the determination in her eyes gave him pause. This wasn't the same Delilah who needed protecting. Her ordeal had revealed a steel core he'd always suspected was there. "It'll be dangerous," he warned. "So was being their captive," she replied evenly. "At least now I have a gun." She picked up the fallen rustler's revolver, checking it with practiced ease. Drake exchanged glances with his men, who shrugged in resigned admiration. "We'll need to move fast," he finally conceded. "Holden will be pushing hard for the border now." By his calculations, Holden was less than a day from the crossing point. With fresher horses and no cattle to slow them, they could intercept the gang before they reached Mexico, but only just. They rode through the afternoon and into the night, stopping only when necessary. Drake kept close to Delilah, noticing how she occasionally swayed with exhaustion but never complained. By dawn, they reached a ridge overlooking the winding Nueces River. Below, they could see dust rising from the cattle herd approaching the crossing. 4 men with Holden," Miguel reported after studying them through a spyglass. "Plus Holden himself. They'll reach the river within the hour." "Once they cross, Mexican authorities won't help us," Tom added. "Some might even be in Holden's pocket." Drake nodded grimly. "We stopped them here." He outlined his plan. Miguel and Tom would circle around to cut off their retreat, while Drake and Delilah would approach from higher ground, using the sun at their backs for cover. "Remember, they're desperate men with nothing to lose," Drake cautioned. "Stay behind me and don't take unnecessary risks." Delilah checked her borrowed pistol one last time. "These men stole my future and threatened worse. I won't hide while you risk your life for me." Drake wanted to argue but recognized the futility. Instead, he surprised her by taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. "When this is over," he said softly, "there's much I need to tell you, Delilah." A blush colored her cheeks as she nodded. "Then let's make sure it's over today." They separated as planned, Drake and Delilah working their way down the ridge while Miguel and Tom circled behind the approaching herd. The cattle were moving sluggishly, exhausted from the forced march and lack of proper care. Holden and his remaining men looked similarly haggard, constantly scanning behind them for pursuit. When they were within shouting distance of the river, Drake moved into position. "Holden," he called out, his rifle aimed steadily. "That's far enough." The rustlers reacted instantly, weapons drawn as they sought the source of the voice. Holden spotted Drake on the ridge and snarled a curse. "O'Malley!" Should have known Samuel would send his pet cowboy after his precious daughter. "It's over," Drake replied calmly. "You're surrounded. Release the cattle and surrender." Holden laughed harshly. "I count 2 of you against 5 of us. Those ain't odds I'm afraid of." As if on cue, shots rang out from behind the herd as Miguel and Tom made their presence known. One of Holden's men fell immediately while the others scattered for cover. "Make that 4 against 3, Drake corrected. Holden's face contorted with rage as he realized the trap. "Kill them all," he shouted to his men. "Start with the girl." What followed was a chaotic gun battle across the dusty approach to the river. The cattle, already skittish from exhaustion, began to stampede in confusion, adding to the danger. Drake and Delilah were forced to retreat up the ridge as bullets splintered the rocks around them. Delilah proved herself a capable shot, her father having taught her well. She wounded one of the rustlers as he tried to flank their position. "Drake, behind you," she warned as another approached from their left. Drake spun and fired in one fluid motion, dropping the man before he could get a shot off. The battle shifted as the remaining rustlers tried to use the panicked cattle as cover to reach the river. Through the dust and confusion, Delilah spotted Holden breaking away, riding hard for the crossing. "He's getting away," she cried, already moving to intercept him. "Delilah, wait," Drake called, but she was already sliding down the ridge, determined not to let her family's tormentor escape. Holden saw her coming and wheeled his horse to face her, his scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. "Should have stayed put, pretty thing," he taunted, raising his pistol. Delilah fired first, her shot catching him in the arm. Holden howled in pain but managed to stay mounted, returning fire as she dove behind a boulder. Bullets ricocheted around her as she reloaded with trembling hands. Drake was racing toward them, terror clutching his heart as he saw Delilah pinned down. Holden was dismounting, advancing on her position with murderous intent. "I'll kill you slow for this," he was promising as he stalked closer. With no clear shot and Holden seconds away from reaching Delilah, Drake did the only thing he could. He launched himself at the rustler in a flying tackle. Both men went down hard, Holden's gun discharging harmlessly into the air. They grappled in the dust, each fighting for their lives. Holden was strong and fought dirty, landing a savage blow to Drake's ribs that left him gasping. As the rustler reached for his fallen gun, Delilah emerged from cover, her pistol trained on him. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice steadier than her hands. Holden froze, then slowly smiled. "You won't shoot me in cold blood, girl. You ain't got the stomach for it." "Try me," she replied, her finger tightening on the trigger. "After what you did to my father, our ranch hands, to me give me one reason not to end you right here." Drake struggled to his feet, clutching his injured side. "Delilah, don't, not like this. He'll face justice in San Pedro." Holden saw the hesitation in her eyes and lunged suddenly, reaching for her gun. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Delilah's weapon. Miguel had appeared on the ridge above, his rifle smoking. Holden stumbled backward, a look of surprise on his face as he clutched his chest, then collapsed into the dust in the aftermath. As they rounded up the surviving rustlers and the scattered cattle, Delilah found herself trembling with delayed shock. Drake wrapped his coat around her shoulders, his arm a steady presence. "It's truly over now," he assured her. "We'll get these cattle back to your father. The bank will have no reason to foreclose once they see you haven't lost your herd." Delilah looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. "You came for me," she said simply. "You tracked them for weeks across half of Texas." "I would have tracked them to the ends of the earth," he repeated softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Delilah, I've been wanting to tell you for so long. I love you. Have loved you since the moment you stood up to that bull that broke into your father's garden 3 summers ago. You were fearless then, just as you're fearless now." Delilah's breath caught in her throat. "Why did you never say anything?" "Fear," he admitted with a small smile. "The only kind I know. Fear that you'd never see me as more than your father's neighbor. Fear of ruining the friendship we had." "For such a brave man," she replied, reaching up to touch his weathered cheek, "you can be remarkably foolish, Drake O'Malley." His eyes widened slightly. "Does that mean—" Instead of answering, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with all the emotion of their shared ordeal and the feelings long kept hidden. When they finally parted, both breathless, Drake rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that years ago," he murmured. "Yes," she agreed with a smile. "But you're making up for lost time admirably." The journey back to San Pedro took nearly 2 weeks, their pace slowed by the need to properly care for the recovered cattle. The surviving rustlers were bound and guarded carefully, destined for the San Pedro jail and eventually the gallows. As they traveled, Drake and Delilah's bond deepened. By night, they would sit apart from the others, talking long into the evening about their hopes and dreams. Drake spoke of expanding his ranch, of the house he'd been building, one much larger than a bachelor would need. Delilah shared her vision for breeding stronger, disease-resistant cattle by crossing their stock with Drake's hardy longhorns. "We think alike," Drake observed, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the stars emerge. "Always have." "It just took a band of rustlers to make us realize it," she replied, nestling against him. Miguel and Tom exchanged knowing glances over the campfire, having witnessed the romance blossoming before their eyes. "About time," Miguel muttered to his companion. "The boss has been mooning over that girl for years." "Took him long enough," Tom agreed. "Though I could have done without chasing rustlers across Texas to make it happen." When they finally rode into San Pedro, news of their approach had preceded them. The town turned out to welcome them, cheering as the recovered cattle were driven through the main street. Sheriff Taylor was waiting along with his deputies to take custody of the prisoners. "You did what a whole posse couldn't," the sheriff admitted grudgingly to Drake. "Though I can't say I approve of vigilante justice. We brought them back alive," Drake pointed out. "All except Holden, who gave us no choice." The sheriff nodded grimly. "No one's crying over that one. He's been terrorizing ranchers from here to the Rio Grande for years." As the commotion settled, Drake turned to Delilah. "There's someone waiting for you," he said softly, nodding toward the doctor's office. Samuel Zimmerman stood in the doorway, supported by a cane but standing nonetheless. His face lit up at the sight of his daughter, arms opening wide as she ran to him. "My brave girl," he whispered as he held her tight. "When I saw those cattle coming down the street, I knew you'd made it home." "Drake found me," she explained through tears of joy. "He never gave up." Samuel extended a hand to Drake over his daughter's shoulder. "You brought back everything that matters to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "There's no repaying that kind of debt." Drake clasped the older man's hand firmly. "There's no debt between us, Samuel. Never has been." He hesitated, then added, "Though I would like to speak with you about your daughter when you're feeling stronger." Samuel's eyes twinkled knowingly. "I've been waiting years for you to ask. The answer's yes, provided she'll have you." "Have him for what?" Delilah asked, looking between them. Drake dropped to one knee right there in the dusty street, taking her hand in his. "For a husband, if you'll honor me with your hand. I know it's sudden after everything you've endured, and I'll wait as long as you need, but I want everyone to know my intentions are—" "Yes," Delilah interrupted, pulling him to his feet with surprising strength. "My answer is yes, Drake O'Malley." And there, Before the entire town of San Pedro, she sealed her acceptance with a kiss that left no doubt of her feelings. Their wedding took place that autumn, after the cattle had been properly tended and both ranches secured for the coming winter. The Zimmerman and O'Malley properties were formally joined, creating one of the largest spreads in the county. Drake's spacious house became their home, with Samuel taking the comfortable suite of rooms on the ground floor that Drake had thoughtfully designed with an older resident in mind. "You planned this all along," Delilah accused him playfully on their wedding night as they stood on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I hoped," Drake corrected, his arms encircling her waist from behind. "Hope is different from planning. Planning suggests certainty, and where you were concerned, I was never certain of anything except how I felt." She turned in his embrace to face him. "And how do you feel now, Mr. O'Malley?" "Like the luckiest man in Texas," he replied, before claiming her lips in a passionate kiss that promised a lifetime of love. As months turned to years, the O'Malley Ranch prospered beyond their expectations. Their innovative cattle breeding program produced stock that weathered drought and disease better than any in the region, attracting buyers from as far away as Kansas City. Delilah proved herself an astute businesswoman, managing the books and negotiations while Drake oversaw the daily operations. Their family grew with the birth of their son, Samuel Drake O'Malley, in the summer of 1877, followed by twins, a boy and girl named Thomas and Catherine, 2 years later. The children thrived in the ranch environment, learning to ride almost before they could walk and developing their parents' love for the land and its animals. San Pedro itself grew alongside the O'Malley fortunes, with Drake and Delilah investing in the town's development. They helped establish a proper school, contributed to the building of a new church, and even funded a small hospital after Samuel suffered a health scare that highlighted the need for better medical care in their community. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children playing in the yard of the home they'd built together, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Sometimes I think about those terrible weeks," she admitted, her hand finding Drake's. "Not with fear anymore, but with a strange kind of gratitude. If Holden hadn't taken me, would we be sitting here now? Would you have ever found the courage to tell me how you felt?" Drake squeezed her hand. "I like to think I would have eventually stumbled into good sense, but maybe not. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best. I'll never forget how I felt when I heard your voice that day by the river," she continued. "In that moment, I knew I was already in love with you, had been for years without fully realizing it. And I knew when I saw you fighting back against those rustlers that you were the strongest person I'd ever met," Drake replied. "Not just someone to protect, but someone to stand beside for the rest of my life." As twilight settled over their ranch, they called the children in for supper. The family gathered around the large oak table that had become the heart of their home. Samuel, now silver-haired but still sharp-minded, said the blessing before they shared the meal and the stories of their day. Later that night, with the children asleep and the ranch quiet under a canopy of stars, Drake and Delilah stood on their porch just as they had on their wedding night. The land stretched before them, their legacy taking shape in cattle and crops, in buildings and children. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if we'd married earlier?" Delilah asked, leaning against her husband's solid frame. Drake considered the question before answering. "I think we came together when we were ready, when we'd both become the people we needed to be for each other. Not a moment too soon or too late." She smiled at his wisdom. "So you don't regret having to track rustlers across Texas to claim your bride?" "Not for a second," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I'd prefer not to repeat the experience." "Agreed," she laughed softly. Once is quite enough for this lifetime. As they retired to their bedroom, the legacy of their ordeal remained not as a shadow, but as the foundation of the love and life they'd built together. What had begun in terror had transformed into triumph, a story they would pass down through generations of O'Malleys who would call this land home. In the years that followed, whenever travelers passed through San Pedro and remarked on the impressive O'Malley Ranch, locals would sometimes share the tale of the beautiful rancher's daughter kidnapped by rustlers, and the determined cowboy who tracked them for weeks to bring her home. The story grew with each telling, as such stories do, but at its heart remained the simple truth that love, when tested by fire, emerges stronger and more enduring than before. And on quiet evenings, when Drake and Delilah sat together watching the sunset over their land, they needed no words to express what they both knew, that some journeys, no matter how difficult, are worth every step when they lead you home to where you belong.